Hey everyone, it's Erin. Welcome or welcome back if you haven't been here before. Okay, so today we have a really fun review. I'm reviewing The Star-Touched Queen by Roshani Chokshi, and we're gonna get right into it. Okay, so I'm gonna split it up into a spoiler-free plot summary synopsis. And then talk about like from a reader's perspective and then from a writer's perspective what I thought. And always, because you know, we don't have a cocktail without cocktails, today I'm drinking some sherry, which sounds weird and weirdly grown up, but it's kind of delicious. So I recommend it with some like butterscotch or some like shortbread cookies. Delicious. So I recommend that. So I'll wait for you guys to get whatever you're drinking, coffee, tea, wine, whatever it is, and we'll get started. Cheers. Okay. So Star-Touched Queen, I saw this in the independent bookstore I was at, The Ripped Bodice, which I mentioned in a couple other videos, and I saw it and I had seen a couple other booktubers talk about it in their book hauls, and you know, it was a new release, and so I was really excited about it after seeing the premise. Not a very widely, I think, represented, at least in YA, which is like Indian mythology and culture, so I was really interested in it. I haven't seen it, I haven't read anything personally that dealt with that, so I was really interested. And I gotta say, like, I was looking at some of the reviews on Goodreads, and it is very hotly debated about certain things of this book, which I think is very interesting. I always think books that have like reviews very positive or very negative are really interesting. So, and there are still fireworks going off because it's the 5th of July, and that's something that happens apparently. Okay, so really quickly, Star-Touched Queen, it is sort of a Hades and Persephone type retelling, Beauty and the Beast, very similar, but set in an Indian culture, mythology, so that's sort of the premise. There's a young girl, she grows up sort of like in the shadows, she sort of like has this future that's foretold, her horoscope, or you know, the stars sort of like foretold her future, and they sort of outline this very negative, dreary death and destruction, so everybody sort of uses her as a scapegoat for everything, and she never really can see any like real freedom for herself anywhere. Maya, the main character, grows up in this Indian palace, and then she is sort of like forced to marry, and then she chooses, and then based off of like situations that arise, she sort of hurries her decision and marries sort of this person who shows up sort of in the middle of nowhere. And then the story revolves around them and sort of like how they sort of relate to these larger than life celestial beings and all this other stuff. So if you're familiar with like Greek mythology or Hades and Persephone, it's a little bit similar to that. However, it's very much rooted in like Indian mythology and Indian culture, which I find kind of refreshing. So this is a pretty bad synopsis, but I'm trying to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. So she basically has to navigate certain situations and figuring whether or not she trusts her new husband or not, and then also decisions that revolve around her, accepting her role and her powers and things like that. So from a reader's perspective, I did find it a little difficult to get invested in it. It took me a good, I think, 100 pages before it really started to hit me. And I think that the first 100 pages, things happen, but then there's a lot of spaces in between where not a lot of stuff happens. So I think that you have sort of like in between spaces where you're waiting for things, but nothing really ever happens as much as you want it to happen. So I think, you know, as a reader, I really liked the prose. That was one of the biggest things in both the good and bad reviews about talking about Roshani Chokshi's, her prose and kind of like pushing limits of like, you know, kind of literary prose and sort of poetic and using a lot of metaphors and sort of building her world around that instead of through very deliberate descriptions, which I found I liked them. I also found them a little problematic because I did feel like she overdid it a little bit. I wanted her to sort of like ground some of the more beautiful metaphors into things that were more tangible for me. So, you know, if you're talking about I want to measure, you know, the time and sunsets and stuff like that, then I also want you know, more physical descriptions that are more tangible to me to hold on to, like, you know, what are the colors actually look like, what do things feel like, you know, physically, or what are things, you know, what do you think you experience things emotionally and cerebrally, but how do you experience things on a tangible physical realm? I think that might have been missing, which I think if she had more of that, or like a balance in between those two, I think people would find the less of like an overdose of like the literary prose. So people had a problem with sort of like the people called it overdone. I did think she sort of like just needed to pin it down with things that were more physical, and then less sort of like building less and less and less upon the same sort of like illusions and things like that. I thought it was very powerful in the emotional aspect. Like there are certain things where I like got goosebumps because I feel like they were so powerfully delivered, or you can imagine like the situations. They felt very larger than life, which I think is needed because you're talking about, you know, you're talking about things that are not just people. So I think when you're talking about things that supersede lifetimes and mortality, you sort of have to have a little bit more gravitas in your prose. So I sort of grant her that because I'm all in for that. But when you don't have anything to hook the readers back into the physical realm, you sort of like are building more upon air, and it gets a little tedious to be like, okay, well, where am I? What is actually happening? What does it actually mean? You like are taken out of the beauty of the language because of the language and the way it's constructed, and be like, well, what does that actually mean? Then you sort of are losing what the whole point of having the prose is. They're just to back up and make the point more poignant, make the point more emotional and deliberate, and sort of like have more weight to it. So I think as a reader though, I really did like the inclusion of literary prose and more metaphorical prose and a little bit more poetic language. I feel like YA needs a little bit more of that. Like it needs a little bit more of a push to greater heights of literature, because otherwise we're sort of stuck in this E.L. James, Twilight-esque writing category. And I really think that, like, you know, if we're reading YA and you're in your mid-20s or early 30s like me, then you need something a little bit more than just the casual YA, you know, like person doesn't read very often type of book. So I think you need a little bit more weight to your stories, and I really appreciate something that makes me think a little bit more and is a little bit more powerful, emotional to me. I also really enjoyed reading something from like a culture I wasn't very familiar with, so there were a lot of words and terms where I sort of had to deduce from what the other sentences were around, what they were, what they meant. And I did sort of like use her glossary at the end and sort of like look up more things so I could have better reference. But a lot of the way they've like related to each other, you sort of got where they fit. And I really loved sort of entering a new world. It felt very new and fresh to me. So a lot of the things I feel like people get tired with the tropes of, in terms of YA, a lot of people were complaining about the like insta love, where two characters fall instantly in love with each other when they first see each other, is a problem in YA. And like, let's be honest, this is not just a problem in YA. I mean, Romeo and Juliet, you know, William Shakespeare, that guy, yeah. That was a big, a big situation of insta love. So I think that, you know, there was a very clear insta love situation from him to her, but there is a reason for it. So I feel like if you have an insta love, or you have a love but it's explainable in a way that like moves the plot forward or moves the story forward, to me that's not really problematic in terms of like, oh well, this is just this and this trope. To me, it like, I don't see it as a problem if it's just part of the story in that particular story. So that there was a lot of romance. So if you're not really into romance, I would say this might not be the book for you. But I really loved the relationship between the two main characters. It felt, again, sort of like larger than life, which I really feel like I need in a YA that has like a lot of high stakes. So I really felt like I wanted to root for them together, and it takes a lot to say like, okay, well, if it's just any paranormal book where it's just like one girl and she falls in love with, I don't know, alien, vampire, whatever, and just like, okay, well, why do you need to be with this guy? Like, why does this, because he's an alien? I don't know. But in this sense, like, there was a very clear reason why I feel like these two characters belong to each other and belong together. So I was definitely like all in for that. Also, like, the way that it sets up, like, I think the romance of the poetic language and the metaphor sort of fit the like romance is larger than life. So I think like those two are fitting. So I feel like if you're into one or you like one, you'll like the other. But it's not a typical like Throne of Glass type of like book where she doesn't need no man kind of thing. So if that's what you're looking for, this might not be the pick for you either. Okay, so just referencing my thing. As a reader, I really liked the prose. I liked the mythology and the culture because it was something new to me, and I really loved sort of like the imagery. I thought the imagery that she had around that was really strong. And so I could actually see and feel like I was a part of that, which was really cool. In terms of, and also from a reader's perspective, there was a little bit, I think, lacking with the world building. I think that she sort of has a half a world, and then she uses like one character story to really move it along. I think you are sort of fixated on like, okay, well, there are some Indian mythology references and culture references, and then you're sort of like fill in the gaps. And there might have been too many gaps that she sort of like required you to fill in with your mind. So sometimes it was a little bit difficult to say like, okay, they're going from this realm to this realm to this realm, but like what is the distinguishing factors from here to here? And so that was a little confusing at some points. Also, there were a lot of criticisms about her not being a strong female character or the Bechdel test or things like that. But I think in some cases, like, because the bigger goal here was to be true to the culture, the specific culture and mythology that was represented, I think that, you can't really have one main thing and then have this other thing also. You really have to be true to like the specific purpose. And I think in that case, being true to like the Indian folklore, culture, mythology is sort of the primary goal. And I feel like that was very successful. So, in terms of these other things, I feel like the authenticity has to come first. And I love strong female characters, I do. But to me, she was a strong female character because of even in Insurmountable Odds, she still, used everything at her disposal to sort of like, to get what she wanted and to be able to get, where she needed to be. And I think that she didn't wait for anyone to save her. She really did take it, even if those situations arose, she really did do things her own way on her own terms. So to me, I don't think that, it was a sacrifice in any way to say just because she didn't do things in a specific way doesn't mean she wasn't a strong female character. I think overall as a reader, I really enjoyed this book. I have been finding more and more issues with some YA books lately that feel like fall into certain tropes. And I feel like but this book, definitely 100 pages in, I felt like it started to pick up a lot more. There was a lot more action. I feel like when she started to do more stuff I got a lot more interested and invested, because it's really much of her journey is the biggest thing. So I really enjoyed it. I really loved the romance part of it, and like the literary prose I also really liked. I'm not a huge romance person. I don't read it that often, but I feel like when it's done right or done well and it feels magnetic, I really like the way it intertwines with the rest of the story. So from a writer's perspective, I think it's really interesting to note that you can push language into more of an emotional realm and not just physical. It doesn't have to be we kissed and there were fireworks, which is pretty overused to say the least. But I think that, to be able to use some of the emotional weight into language and to create these like spaces that feel larger than life with the way that you sort of like play with language and almost like poetic language, there's space for that, there's room for that. And I feel like reading poetry or reading mythology and things like that, where very metaphorical things become tangible, or magical realism and things like that, I feel like those can definitely inspire and influence YA more. So those are things that I really gravitate to, so I'm looking forward to reading more of that. I also really love like the fresh take on Hades and Persephone, Beauty and the Beast, that sort of story. So I'm interested to see if we see more Indian mythology, Indian culture represented in YAs, particularly in YA fantasy. I would love to read more of it. So I think that the authenticity really rings true for this book, and really shows like everything ties in well together. I think everything is very consistent in its own mythology. In terms of the world building, I feel like you need to have a little bit more structure and less on like specific characters and plot to help fill in the blanks. So I feel like even if we didn't see it on page, I would love to see sort of like where it feels a little bit more real, and less, I feel like those characters are really real. I would need a little bit more on the world. So I think like I would love to see a little bit more development fleshed out on the realms and like the creatures and like a little bit more of that. Lastly, I think like in the descriptive metaphors to also have points where it's very tangible. Again, sort of like the actual like meat and potatoes of, okay, well, this looks like this and this looks like this. And even if not everything ends up on page, I feel like having certain things rooted in tangible helps emotionally prime you for those sort of like unbelievable wow moments of metaphor and literary prose. Okay, also I just found out that the sequel, which centers around her sister and like her adventure, so it's going to be a little bit more like in the same world but different lead character, which I really like, called Crown of Wishes, which is amazing, and the cover looks really beautiful. It's coming out March 2017, so I'm very excited for that. So I gotta say, like, I think this is one of my favorite YAs that I've read definitely this year, and I was really surprised by this one. Some of the other ones that I've read, Snow Like Ashes, which I liked, I wasn't as surprised by it. I felt it was a little bit like I've read that book kind of before, although I liked it. And I feel like a lot of other ones with like a strong female characters, I feel like I've read those before too, and I feel like I haven't read this before. Whether it be from mythology, the culture, or the story, just whatever it was, all wrapped into one. I feel like this was really fresh to me, and I really enjoyed it. So I feel like if you like romance, and if you're sort of interested in experiencing sort of like Indian mythology culture a little bit more, and then you kind of like are open to that sort of like literary prose, and if you like poetry and things like that, I feel like you would be interested in this. So I definitely really liked it, and I feel like I'm a little bit pickier when it comes to certain YA, so I feel like maybe I sort of like, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, and then I was pleasantly surprised by this. But, it wasn't perfect. I definitely had some issues with it, but overall I feel like I really did enjoy it. I would recommend it to people that I thought really liked YA fantasy. And yeah, we're interested in a really good read. Okay, so tell me in the comments down below if you hated it, why you hated it, or if you loved it, why you loved it. All of that good stuff. Are you excited about reading Crown of Wishes? I will definitely be reading it and reviewing it when it comes out next year. And then, yeah, tell me if you're interested in reading this one, or if you've read anything you think might be better that I would like. Recommend it down in the comments below. If you haven't already and you like to, go ahead and subscribe, and then tell me what books you're reading and what books I should review next. All right, until next time. Bye, guys.